Welcome back. This is Chapter 17, Industrial America, Corporations and Conflicts, 1877 to 1911. Let's get started. So, the rise of big business. Let's look at some innovators in enterprise. That means innovators in business, innovators in new technologies, innovators in new industries or businesses. So we want to look at production of materials and sales. Gustavus Swift, the assembly line, and that assembly line would be for meat packing. And when you look at the assembly line and in the meat packing industry, and in particular, he was good of integrating vertically, where a company controls all aspects of production from beginning to end. That means, for instance, in meat packing, you would own the cows, possibly the pastures, bring them to the stockyards, to the slaughterhouse, and owning the refrigerated cars that would bring them to market. That, again, I'm not saying that's what Swift exactly did, but I'm thinking off the top of my head, that would be vertical integration, which I'm sure you might have heard before, from farm to table. That would be vertical integration if you controlled all aspects of that production, which would be meat or meat packing. Also, another way to be able to achieve this would be to be able to take over different aspects or to get more business would be predatory pricing, where you would lower prices to eliminate your competitors. Great example of that back in the late 80s into the 90s, the Home Depot would go into different areas, particularly New England. I should know because I sold lumber wholesale. Home Depot would come in and they would have the lowest prices. So all these small businesses that used to sell lumber, these neighborhood, let's just say large hardware stores that sold lumber, these small lumber companies, would be priced right out, and it would eliminate the competition. And for a while there, Home Depot was able to kind of raise their prices because all the other independents were closing down until Lowe's showed up. So a good case study when it comes to monopoly, control, vertical integration. We're going to look at horizontal integration in the creation of trusts. This would be the Standard Oil Company. John D. Rockefeller used vertical integration from beginning to end to be able to control as much as he could of the process. However, horizontal integration is when you merge competitor companies with his own to gain a market advantage. So what he would do, he was more originally a refinery, but he went into the transport. You're going to see in the documentary that you watch, he's going to get away from rail and be able to build his own pipelines to be able to control and pay less for transport of oil. And he would go and buy a lot of competitors. And if not, he would basically price those competitors out until they would get to their knees and sell to him anyways. So it's a pretty ruthless thing. And what the Standard Oil did is create the Standard Oil Trust. It would be a small group of individuals would hold stock from competing firms, thus controlling all of them. So say horizontally, all the refiners in the country that mean anything would be part of the Standard Oil Trust. And the CEOs or the owners of each company would be part of this trust. Therefore, they could control the market, control prices. You could even see this being done in vertical integration. If you're able to get, in say meat packing, the big ranchers send their representatives along with the people that move and transport the cows from the railroads, possibly to the stockyards in Chicago and the slaughterhouses, and they're all together and send their top guys, those guys back then, that could create a trust too. Again, it's fictitious, but just so you can understand. J.P. Morgan, who was a financier, eventually bought Andrew Carnegie's steel company and created the first $1 billion company. Today we talk about billions like it's popcorn. $1 billion is a lot of money. And a $1 billion company created before it was the turn of the 20th century was a big deal. J.P. Morgan, again, was a financier in banking, but he asked Andrew Carnegie what he wanted for the company, gave him a number, and he immediately accepted, and Carnegie noticed right away that he would have paid more for it. And we'll see all that when we watch the films and have some more discussions. So I know it's kind of all over the place. I mean, you've done the reading on this chapter, but just to give examples of the big guys like Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie. Rockefeller with oil refinery in particular. Eventually, from a byproduct to create gasoline. J.P. Morgan in finance and Andrew Carnegie in steel. Gustavus Swift in meatpacking. You're going to see some other folks that are going to come along the way too. For that, Cornelius Vanderbilt in railroads. These are going to be the giants, and these either captains of industry or they're robber barons, that kind of thing. So these innovators in enterprise, we need to assess these industrialists. Were they robber barons or industrial statesmen? Another term would be robber barons or captains of industry. I kind of like the term industrial statesman more, because when you look at the later careers and lives of Rockefeller and Carnegie and other folks, they're going to try to outdo each other in philanthropy, so they're more industrial statesmen. Depending on the economy, the views will often change about these men throughout history. We'll be talking a lot about historiography and how the views of different historical figures or events will change depending on the politics and realities of the day in the nation will affect the interpretation of history. If the economy is good, these industrial statesmen will be championed. When the economy is bad, say like the Great Depression in the 1930s, folks like Carnegie and Rockefeller and the like will be looked at as robber barons, that they're making all this money on the expense of the working person. What's going to rise from this massive industrialization is a natural consumer culture where department stores were able to cut prices significantly. Why? Because of the supply of manufactured goods they're going to have. Because companies like Macy's, one of my favorites, with these home order catalogs, help those living in rural areas. There'll be Sears catalog. There'll be there's a Montgomery Ward will be another big company. In the Northeast will be like Filene's, more with clothing. J.C. Penney, that kind of stuff. This consumer culture, again, textiles manufactured, furniture, with the advent of steel. I mean, that'll be more into heavy construction, but also being able to build some of the early home appliances and things of that sort. There's going to be this consumption of consumer culture because folks are going to be working. The economy, I mean, some folks aren't going to be paid great, but still, you're still going to have one of the richest growing industrial countries in the world. And it isn't just going to be the rich industrialists making money. There's going to be a lot of other things created. And so there's going to be some disposable income, if there is any, to buy these different manufactured goods. Already talked about Sears and Montgomery Ward, where their advertisements appeared all over the nation, including outdoors on billboards. Billboards are constructed even on sides of buildings, skyscrapers, things of that sort. I think you've seen those. So the corporate workplace is going to arise, where white-collar workers in professional positions, blue-collar workers are your manual labor that use their hands. So professional positions, sales, management, um, other professional positions like doctors, lawyers, accountants, that kind of stuff. Blue collar workers would be your carpenters and your laborers and those that work in the factories and later on automakers and that kind of stuff. And there's a nice picture of a office in the late 19th, early 20th century. Oh, there's a typo. Managers and salesmen to no salesmen. Sorry about that. New middle managers will emerge in charge of goods and labor. You got to understand, everything was done manually back then. You had accounting books. You needed these middle managers. Everything was done with pencil and paper, and filing. Your organization of your company was based on people. Even in sales, you didn't have telephones. People weren't using the telephones. Ironically, people won't start using the telephone a lot for sales until the early 70s. In the lumber business, my dad in the Northeast was kind of a pioneer in that, because for years and years and years, salespeople would go door to door to their businesses. My dad sold lumber wholesale. And what it was, you had these salesmen that would go on the road every week and do their rounds to the different lumber yards and see what they needed. My dad would turn that to, well, instead of always being on the road, you had the energy crisis in the mid 70s where gas was expensive and was not always, you had the gas lines and all that. He, and to their kicking and screaming originally, would have them do the majority of their business on the phone. So, reason I'm saying this, guys, is that it took a lot of people to run a company back then, because your biggest asset were people and person-to-person communication, and everything was done written down. There weren't any computers. There weren't even really telephones. So all this had to be done with human organization. Sales positions will increase throughout the U.S. with the opportunity for money. And again, sales back then was person to person, door to door, in person. Okay? So it took a lot of people to be able to move around, to be able to sell stuff. Women in the corporate office by the end of the 1800s, 77% of stenographers were women. And stenography was a kind of a shorthand, the way to record what people are saying in meetings and other things, to be able to get a record. Clerking and secretarial opportunities for women increased and paid better than other domestic jobs. So women were going into the offices, working there. It paid better than, being a housekeeper or other domestic services. 4 million women worked by 1900. Now significant. On the shop floor, the de-skilling of labor, where the institution of remote tasks that requires less autonomy of the worker. Because of the assembly line and mass production and mechanization, labor is going to be de-skilled. If you're going to be, making shoes when they were handmade, you needed to have a skill as not a cobbler, but as a shoemaker. Well, when you have a machine doing it, you got to have somebody that kind of just feeds the machine. That's de-skilling. You don't need skill to do that. You need to be able to stand in front of a machine that does it. And then you have Taylorism and Frederick Taylor and this whole idea of scientific management. You cannot underscore the influence of Frederick Taylor. We'll see him later on. That Taylor's principles of scientific management and efficiency is going to be applied, and there's going to be progressives that are going to transfer that skill of scientific management, take it from the factory floor and try to put it in the government. And there could be scientific management of government and scientific management to be able to organize society. And that's a real heart of progressivism. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but Frederick Taylor and his ideas have an enormous impact on not just the assembly line, and again, using strict rules to govern worker behavior, time tasks, and doing the same tasks over and over. That would be part of the assembly line, but a lot of his principles are going to be put into government bureaucracy and the delivery of services, where you have a little bit expanded from Taylor, using data to make decisions. And it's still under the realm of this scientific management. So some health hazards and pollution from the rise of big business. There were dangerous conditions that were in many industries. And railroad, 1 in 20 deaths or disabilities. Okay. 2,000 coal miners died per year. Okay. Why did people work in these dangerous conditions? They needed the money. Unskilled labor and discrimination. Men and unions discriminated against women. They believed they should stay home. 1 in 5 children under 16 worked outside of the home. African Americans were often paid the least amount, and women worked in mostly domestic service roles. Okay, so you need to understand that there were a lot of risks to this and everything else, but people needed the money. Why did women work, and why did 1 in 5 children work? Because with the poor families working in these unskilled jobs, they needed those salaries in order to make it. A lot of kids started working under the age of 16 because they had to. Didn't have any other choice. Let's look at immigration. Immigrants were the ideal labor supply. They were abundant. They worked for little money. They were very hard to unionize because a lot of the unions rejected them. They didn't want them competing for their jobs. And there were language barriers. So some of these newcomers from Europe post-1892, many immigrants came through Ellis Island, which is in New York, right in New York Harbor, not too far from the Statue of Liberty. These new immigrants were mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italy, Greece, Russia. 3 million of them were Jews. Many of these immigrants took low-paying jobs. So Italians would work in laboring, construction trade in the cities. Greeks, services, restaurants, the food business, but also, laboring jobs too. Same with the Russians, but many of the Jewish that came that were from Russia, of those 3 million Jews, they got more into peddling, selling goods and wares, maybe door to door with a cart, but eventually Jews that did well in peddling, also tailoring, clothes, haberdashing, that would be men's clothes and things of that sort. Eventually, those folks will become the owners and founders of department stores in the cities. They'll continue to be in retail, fashion, clothing, but also they originally were low-paying jobs as neighborhood peddlers, having carts and selling goods and wares. Asian Americans and their exclusion. Chinese immigrants faced extreme prejudice and violence out west. They worked in restaurants and laundries as they were the only jobs available. Then you had the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, pretty embarrassing, where it barred Chinese for coming into the U.S. and it was repealed in 1943. And, I always ask the question, why the Chinese? So it's really sad. You can tell the difference from someone that's Asian versus white. It's because they're visually identifiable by race. So I would argue that the Chinese Exclusion Act, the reason why it happened, because there was racial identity. So therefore, no other way to say it, pretty racist. So, and there's a depiction of a Chinese American. This is the only one barred out. Enlightened American statesman. We must draw the line somewhere You look at noticed communists, nihilists, socialists, Fenian and hoodlum, welcome but no admittance to Chinamen. Golden Gate of Liberty, this is on the West Coast, Golden Gate Bridge, Angel Island in San Francisco. Okay? It speaks for itself. Also, because of the Industrial Revolution, you have all these immigrants that come in. Labor is going to get organized. The first thing to note is the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. As a reaction to wage cuts, protests erupted in many cities across the country. Again, the United States economy is still bad with that panic of 1873, and it kept going and going. You had the election of 1876 that was contested and was finally decided by the Compromise of 1877. The economy was rough. So this is definitely a reaction to, most of your strikes would be a reaction to wage cuts. And the railroads took a massive hit. One of the reasons for this panic was because of the overbuilding of the railroads. So more than 50 people died in this Great Railroad Strike, so it became violent. Many workers were blacklisted, which means prevented from being hired in the future. So those names would be circulated to the different railroads around the country. Yeah, you don't want to hire Peter Hookerseel because he's a union organizer and he's going to cause some problems. So the farmer's plight. Despite tariffs, that means it would protect American goods or services or products or agricultural products. The farmers hated the tariffs because what they didn't help farmers. If you really think about it, tariffs were on manufactured goods. And what it would do is, because of that, preference would be given to, by the railroads, would be given to the industrialists, because the industrialists had all the money. And they were getting favoritism from the government with the tariffs. This is from the viewpoint of a farmer. The reason they argued the railroads exploited them is they charged them much higher rates than they did to, say, for Rockefeller to have a bunch of cars of oil. Because, as you read, Rockefeller would negotiate with the railroads early on for rebates. They have discounted rates because he would fill a whole car. I'll fill a bunch of cars on the train. So the train will be going the maximum number of cars on its distance. And therefore, the more cars you have, the more money you're going to make. But who ended up getting screwed on that were the farmers, as those rates were higher. So the farmers didn't like the tariffs. They favored the industrialists. They didn't like the railroads because the railroads were giving cheaper rates to the industrialists. And it made their shipping rates really high. If anybody knows about profit margins on corn, when there's not a lot of money in the system, we'll get into that, gold versus silver or bimetallism versus the gold standard. When there's not a lot of money in the system and it's being all going in, not all, but the vast majority going in the hands of the industrialists, that means people are going to pay much less for agricultural products. So the farmers are not going to be able to afford the high shipping rates because what they have to charge for their crops is so low in the first place. So the farmers are going to get squeezed from so many different ends during this time. And this problem is going to go on for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. The Granger movement. This is where the farmers are going to get organized. So the laborers, all these independent farmers. The National Grange, or the Grange, brought farmers together to discuss their situation. Like we explained before. High shipping rates on the railroads, the tariffs that favored the industrialists. And what came out of this is the Greenback Labor Party was a national movement that sought an 8-hour workday and better working conditions. So you have the Grange and the farmers getting together, but you also have people that are laboring that are getting together too. Okay? And again, you could argue this is all a reaction to the massive change in the economy towards industrialism. The Granger laws were state laws that regulated railroads, and many later were overturned. But eventually, there'll be some Supreme Court decision that would allow the states to regulate railroads and other things. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. You have the Knights of Labor, founded in 1869. They advocated employees should own shops. That means the shop that they worked in. Characteristics of the Knights: they had open membership, skilled and unskilled workers. Women and blacks were welcome too. The Knights of Labor were pretty wide open for everybody. What were the goals? Workplace safety laws, elimination of child labor, the income tax for the wealthy, and public ownership of railroads. Okay. You look at that for the times, a couple of those are pretty radical. Income tax on the wealthy. There was no income tax then. Public ownership of the railroads. It's pretty radical. I mean, today we have basically public ownership of transportation, railroad for transportation and passenger trains. That's called Amtrak. I guess it's public ownership. It's not quite, but it's publicly subsidized. But to own it, that's a whole different ballgame. At its height, the Knights had 750,000 members. The Haymarket Square riot of the meeting of workers to gain 8-hour workday. At the meeting, someone threw a bomb, killing and injuring many. So everybody's there having a meeting, and all of a sudden a bomb goes off. Oh boy. Many anarchists were found guilty and sentenced to death. The Knights of Labor were associated with the Haymarket Square riot, leading to their downfall. It's kind of like guilt by association. These workers were meeting on an 8-hour workday, sponsored, I guess, by the Knights of Labor. All of a sudden a bomb goes off, these massive riots. These anarchists go crazy, people are sentenced to death. But public opinion is going to go, oh, those Knights of Labor, I mean, they're just causing all kinds of problem and mayhem. And there's a pretty famous sketch of the Haymarket Square riot. So again, with farmers and workers, the Cooperative Alliance, this Farmers Alliance, sought to establish cooperative stores, eliminate the middlemen. I guess we can call those farmers markets today. The middleman would be the supermarket. Right. A separate colored farmers alliance was established as well. Again, many former slaves, sharecroppers, and tenant farmers in the South, they made their own alliance to try to sell their crops and work together. Eventually, all these folks are going to morph into the Populist Party, which we'll see in Chapter 20. And also during this time, the Interstate Commerce Act was created, the Interstate Commerce Commission, which allowed the government to investigate railroads, mostly symbolic at first. When the Interstate Commerce Act is passed, it's like, okay, we passed something, and then it doesn't get enforced by the administration. We're going to see later, when Theodore Roosevelt becomes president after the assassination of William McKinley, and pretty short after, he'll actually start working to enforce the Interstate Commerce Act and gave the Interstate Commerce Commission some teeth to be able to push that. Another path for labor would be the American Federation of Labor. Unlike the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL, was comprised of skilled workers only. They didn't want any unskilled workers, women or blacks. And with the AFL, with just skilled workers, they're going to have a real problem with immigrants because the vast majority of immigrants were unskilled workers. And there was a fear with these new factories and assembly lines with immigrants that the skilled workers are going to lose their jobs and lose their living. So the AFL was led by a man named Samuel Gompers, and they sought bread and butter issues or pure and simple unionism. They wanted higher wages, shorter hours, and better working conditions. If you can see, this unskilled and skilled folks kind of wanted some of the same stuff: shorter hours, better working conditions, higher pay. The membership increased to over 2 million at one point, so much more widespread than the Knights of Labor. And there's Sammy Gompers when he was young. And that's pretty much it for Chapter 17. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that we're going to discuss and look at. There's some readings that we're going to do and get much more in depth. But again, just understanding and paying attention to the major industrialists, techniques of vertical and horizontal integration. The Standard Oil Trust is an example of a trust to be able to create that integration, particularly horizontally, at different levels of the process of, say, refineries. With industrialization, there's going to be the need for more labor, and that's going to be a pull factor that's going to pull immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe to the United States because those jobs need to be filled. The new industrial country with this unskilled labor, or this de-skilling of labor that we looked at. And with the massive growth of industrialization, people working in factories, it's going to be problems. It's growing so fast, and be problems with low wages, working conditions, how many hours they worked. A lot of people worked 6 days a week and put in 60, 70-hour work week. That's a long time. Child labor is going to be another issue, and that different types of labor organizations that we saw. Also understanding that the farmer during this time is really having a hard time. This whole Grange movement where they're trying to get together and really put a squeeze on the railroads, that they believe that they're putting a squeeze on them with these high rates. They're also going to call for, taxing the wealthy. They're also going to call for eventually, and we'll see in Chapter 20, bimetallism, to put more money supply into the system so they can get more money for their crops. So I know I'm going ahead, and this is at the end, but I want to just keep that whole way of thinking going here. And if you notice chapters 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, it's over a really short period of time. There's just so much going on. So that's it for this. And again, if you have any questions, email me or ask in class. And thanks for watching.